We are live. Welcome to Technosocial, everyone. My name is Daniel Fraga. I'm here with Owen Cox, and today we are honored to host the illustrious Koert Van Mensvoort. Hello, Koert. Welcome.
Hello, Daniel. Hello, Owen. Good to be here.
Just to introduce Koert, he's the founder and director of the Next Nature Network, a design think tank based in Amsterdam. Koert, you have passed in computer programming, you're a philosopher and a designer. You're the author of several books, the latest of which is Next Nature, Why Technology is Our Natural Future, and that's going to be a little bit about what we're going to explore today. Yeah. Additionally, Koert was a personal mentor of mine when I did an internship at the Next Nature Network in about 2016. So I'm really, really happy to have you here on the podcast.
Yeah, good to be here. And that was a lot of fun when you were with us at the Next Nature Network, Daniel. Indeed.
Yes, that was a good time in Amsterdam.
Yeah, good time. Yeah, happy times now. Looking back,
very much so.
Look at all the changes, and that it's now almost impossible to travel. And yeah,
indeed. I think we could probably add that in at some point in the conversation and how our new normal has really shifted. But just to start, and I know you've probably answered this question many times. But if you had to define for our listeners who don't know, what is Next Nature?
Yes. Okay, Next Nature is a different way of looking at the relationship between nature and technology. Because typically the popular idea is that nature and technology are opposite, like day and night or black and white. But then within the Next Nature understanding, you start to realize that nature and technology are not opposite at all. But in a way, the technology is transforming nature into a next nature. And it's quite deliberately that we don't call it new nature, because that would assume that this would happen only once. But the starting point is basically that nature is dynamic. It's not static. It changes. Evolution goes on. It also changes along with us. And we now live in a time in which technology is transforming nature into a new kind of stage. That's not new. I think we will get into this more. But yeah, the nature many people cherish today, like the biosphere, has not always been there. It evolved. So after Earth emerged, that's some 4.5 billion years ago now, in the beginning, it only had this geosphere, rocks but no life. That took some 3 billion years before that biosphere evolved. And that was a new development in evolution and in nature. Only 1 billion years later, people emerged. So yeah, we've just arrived. However, clearly our presence does not go unnoticed. And now with our ingenuity and creativity and technology, we cause this rising of a new sphere on planet Earth, the Technosphere. And just like the biosphere evolved upon the geosphere underneath and has all kinds of interactions with it, now this technosphere is emerging and has all kinds of interactions with it. So yeah, this is what we call also this dynamics we call the Next Nature, and we try to study at Next Nature Network on how are we going to live into this world where technology becomes our next nature.
Fantastic. So I wanted to ask you, because the interesting thing about you is that you connect philosophy with design. So how does this idea of Next Nature plug into your design practice? Or in other words, what's it like to traverse the intersection between philosophy and actually designing, which is something that is, as you say, inherent to the Next Nature?
Yeah. Well, I already spoke a bit about the Next Nature philosophy, and that's a starting point. That's also the why. Every day when I wake up, what am I going to do, and what do I want to contribute? That very much relates to the philosophy and the Next Nature vision, which I think is utterly important. But then the next step, the next question you ask yourself, how am I going to do that? And I could also have been this philosopher that just writes books and articles and essays. That's fine. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. But also because of my education, design also became a way to work on it. And I think that's also very important, that you can use design to basically also materialize the philosophy, which makes it more concrete, more tangible, and hence also more accessible to more people. So yeah, I'm a very hybrid person, and I'm really happy to be very hybrid. That was one of the big discoveries of my life, that I do not really need a profession. I can just like have all these different roles. But of course, the thing you want to add to the world then has to be quite specific.
So speaking of specifics,
Yes.
what areas are you focusing on with Next Nature at the moment?
Yeah, there's so much to do. So yeah, basically the starting point is, how can we live in this next nature and not only have a better future for humanity, but also for all the other species and the planet at large. That's not an answer to your question, because it's too general. But from there, you move on to like, okay, what is a concrete project? So I almost, for me, it's quite tangible that I see the Next Nature philosophy as a tree that grows. And then there's fruit on the tree, which is a concrete project. One of the projects we are working on for quite a while already, but still very important, is an eco coin to create a new kind of currency that rewards sustainable behavior. Because I think it's really weird that we live in a world where you can cut a tree, sell the wood, and then make money. Whereas if you plant a tree, you also create some kind of value, right? If you plant a tree, but you're not being paid. So we want to change that system, and then also play the game of crypto coins and what's happening there and how that's already changing money and value in the world. So that's then a clear project for us. One other, it's a multitude, because we have lots of projects. One other thing is that we are now reopening one of the most iconic buildings in the Netherlands. It's called Evoluon. I should show you a picture, and then you can look it up, or maybe I can show it to you. Let's see if I can do that.
Could you get sharing permission, Jolan?
No, I want to do it in another way. I want to here we are. This is the building.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. This is the building we are. It's a monument, and it looks like a flying saucer, of course, but it's one of the most iconic buildings in the Netherlands, and it was this 60s space age science museum. And now it's a conference center, so it's more like business to business, but it will reopen to the audience. And we have with our team the honor to program this huge building. So that's quite exciting. That's a project we're also into now.
Wow, that's interesting. And one of the most refreshing things about Next Nature is how instead of going back to nature or expressing this desire to stop human development in its tracks, it has an affirmative answer. It goes forward.
Yes.
One of the things that came to mind, are you aware of the idea of the Nuvoscope?
Absolutely. Yes.
Course,
let's get into that.
Sure.
I know the two of you, you know your philosophy, and this is, of course, well, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So we know, the idea of the noosphere, for those who aren't so much aware of it, is this idea that there is a sphere of mind that it emerges on top of the biosphere. In fact, it emerges on top of a very specific element of the biosphere, namely humans, which in turn evolved out of the geosphere. So it's very similar to the tripartite division that you described.
Yes.
So one of the things that came to mind is, what's the relationship between the technosphere and the noosphere?
Well, first let me explain to people who are not into this. The concept of noosphere is introduced almost a century ago by Vladimir Vernadsky, a Russian theorist, and Tyler Chardin, a French thinker. And indeed, these were the people that at the time also introduced these notions of biosphere and atmosphere. So they were into the spheres. And what I think is quite striking, that today everyone knows this, the biosphere, it's a common word, but noosphere didn't really make it into the collective mind, not yet at least. And it stems from this Greek word nous, which relates to mind or thinking. So it's also the idea that basically there's this sphere of thinking or consciousness on the planet. When I started talking about next nature, and I think some 10 years ago, at the beginning, I always spoke also about geosphere, biosphere, noosphere. But then I noticed that I saw these minds like, what do you mean? So it was too complicated for people. And I shifted to the word technosphere. So that's how it came about. And then with technosphere, people understand it better. And that's now also being popularized because recently there was this article in Nature magazine where scientists calculated that the weight of the technosphere now is bigger than the weight of all the biomass on Earth. So you could say the technosphere is heavier than the biosphere. This is the introduction, because now to answer your question, of course, noosphere, it's a mind sphere. And it's less tangible, because if scientists calculate the weight of the technosphere, well, they calculate all the concrete, like including that big buildings, and that's all part of the technosphere, and you can calculate that. Whereas a mind sphere, it's less tangible. It's something else. So I think there's a slight difference. However, it also depends on your definition of technology and how you define it. Because I define technology as the materialization of ingenuity in the world. That's my very broad definition of technology. And then this, intelligence, ingenuity, this thinking, that would be in the noosphere. And once it becomes a technology, it's materialized, it's part of the technosphere. So typically now, more recently, I often also talk about geosphere, biosphere, technosphere, and then what happens with it, mindsphere or noosphere. And this is super interesting also if you look at the developments within artificial intelligence. Are we through technology putting our intelligence, extending that in the outer world? And would artificial intelligence then be part of this technosphere? Probably yes, but also going towards this mind sphere, because cognition and thinking is also externalized. And it's not exclusively for human beings only. And we are witnessing this now in our time, also as a next nature, because maybe in a few billion years, people, or if there's still people or the intelligence being that are there, then they will just look at it and think, indeed, there the technosphere or the noosphere evolved and had this impact on the planet. It's happening now.
I love where this brings us, because what Daniel and I spend quite a lot of time thinking about is kind of about this junction point to do with the philosophy of humanism and then the philosophy of post-humanism, right? For a long time, we have existed ever since we killed God and Nietzsche proclaimed it. There's been this sense that man is the measure of all things. And as far as I can make sense of the humanist philosophies, technology is a tool for man to improve his material circumstances.
That's where it started.
Yes.
That's the incentive, right? But now maybe something else is happening as well.
Exactly. The technology, is it here for us as a tool to improve our circumstances, or are we here to co-evolve with technology? Yes. Now, I mean, you can probably guess where Daniel and I fall on this spectrum.
Yeah. And I think I'm in the same boat, but it's indeed relevant to look at this incentive, and also other animals do it as well, like materialize their ingenuity in the outer world, but not at the level of humans. And we humans, if you look at human history, well, for ages, humans were just an insignificant species on the planet, until the moment that we started to become technological, and the Stone Axe, the domestication of fire, these kind of moments. So I now am back like 40,000 years in our history, where we somehow are managed to turn our ingenuity in the outer world, develop technology, and quite rapidly become more dominant and powerful. Basically, because we are freeing ourselves from the given natural powers. This already starts with building a roof above your head that emancipates you or frees you from the natural forces of the weather and rain and storms. So that's where technology started, to free us from the natural powers. But now the technology is so omnipresent, often uncontrollable, autonomous, that it becomes this nature of its own, this natural power of its own, that maybe we even have to domesticate, because yes, we think technology serves us, but yeah, we also serve the technology. As you know, I don't have to explain it to you, that indeed the things we design end up designing us. That's where we are now. And we are now at an awareness phase, like, okay, you see it, and then what? All ideas are welcome.
Fantastic. So let me ask you the following. If in the biosphere we could notice certain trends, those trends could be seen on the evolution of life. And if perhaps on the technosphere in the last 40,000 years, we've also seen some trends which we can name, for example, the proliferation of technology, of agriculture, the impact that that had on the human numbers, of how many people we could actually sustain. Do you see any trends today, or can you these sort of major movements in the Mindsphere? We know, for example, that the biosphere is going through climate change,
Yes.
that is going through that sort of alteration.
Yeah.
Are there any climatological shifts happening in the mindscape, in the Mindsphere as well?
Well, I definitely hope so, because I think maybe the Mindsphere is our best chance at saving the biosphere. If you see what I mean, because to explain, we as human, certainly individuals, okay, yes, we evolved on the savannah 40,000 years ago to maybe read the weather, to chase animals, to gather fruits. It's quite linear. And now we are in the situation where we have an impact on the face of the planet. It's called the Anthropocene. That's there now, but we are not really equipped to think at a planetary level. It doesn't come natural to us. So we need to also build all these structures, and you could say institutions, or you could say artificial intelligence, or artificial agency, or organizations. Doesn't matter how you call it, but we need to become good at planetary thinking and planetary awareness. So we need also a mind sphere. We need a planetary mind that sees and feels at a planetary level. And we need it to make sure that Earth thrives. And it's quite urgent.
Let me throw something else into this mix, because one of the things that Owen and I speak about is superorganisms. And we do know that, for example, in the Mindsphere, that we could say that it is composed of memes as these basic units of cultural transmission, these ideas that float around. Now, it also happens, and some thinkers different thinkers have different ways to frame this, that they, let's say, cephalize, that they become autonomous. Guy Debord calls it the society of the spectacle, where he says that capitalism is something that we are only spectators of, and it moves on its own.
Yes.
Even the polemic Alexander Dugin says that these are angels, and he speaks of a political angeliology. We have many different. Carl Jung, I think at some point might have connected them to this idea of ghosts or geists or something like that. Yeah. So I think my question to you is in the Mindsphere, do you see autonomous entities forming already of their own accord?
Yeah, well, I definitely see a certain amount of agency that cannot, at least not be tracked to one individual human being. And so, yeah, that I see happening. But I also see that we are, as humans, we are still part of it. So I often use the metaphor of that, well, my body also consists of billions and billions of cells. And these cells, they have their own needs. They're, in a way, they're also autonomous to a certain extent, because, yeah, a cell is a living being. And there was a time on our planet where the cell existed as a living being, but multicellular organisms were not there yet. And then at a certain point, these cells, they started to cooperate, they started to work together, things became more complex, first in colonies of cells, but later, of course, in multicellular organisms that have their own agency, their own needs, their own metabolism. And yes, that's us, but also all the other animals and plants are multicellular organisms. But we still consist of these individual cells. Now, if you take one step further and you talk about a superorganism that is caused by humans, or I am reluctant to use the word created, because, yeah, it's not a deliberate thing. It's something that occurs, but it's caused by humans. Humans are also part of it, but it also has this other agency at a different level, and probably a more powerful level, because, yeah, it operates at a bigger scale. And, yeah, we are in it. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. But I feel like what is happening is you're postulating sort of a teleology or a direction, and you're doing that by looking at what's happened in other levels. So, you know, if cells are to the body in the same way that perhaps we are to these other organisms, which is useful, and it's a valid answer to a very hard question, which is the question of where do we go now?
Yeah, it's indeed. And well, sorry to disappoint you, because I don't know the answer in detail, and no one does. And maybe that's just where we are, and it would be naive to think you know the answer. But indeed, learning from the past to understand the future can be helpful. And if we are talking about co-evolution between humans and technology, and we are talking about the future of evolution, then yes, I think it can be very, very helpful at looking at evolution in the past. So hence the example of cells. But even, well, in the book, I describe it in more detail, that basically life also builds upon life, right? Because life develops, it can grow higher levels of complexity. And, yeah, this cell in turn was also made from molecules. So, yeah, that was also a moment where the molecules organized themselves into this living structure, magical moment. The cell emerged, but the molecules also consist of atoms. And it could have been a universe with just atoms and no other structure, but no, they organized themselves into molecules. That kind of happened, that evolved. So I'm pretty sure that, and I don't know if it's happening today or tomorrow or in 1,000 years, but evolution will go on. And as we see all these levels of organization in evolution in the past, it makes sense to also expect some other levels of organization in the future. And no, humanity is not the summit or the end point of evolution. Things will change, things will go on. And how do we position ourselves in it? Can we be part of it, or will we be obsolete? That's also a possibility.
Yeah, this future of organization is cool, right? And I usually find myself thinking, following the work of Marshall McLuhan and his ideas of how print media and the written word, particularly print and the kind of mass newspapers and mass media, actually created what was a centralizing effect within societies. So produced the ability to mass distribute something like the news, or like the latest research from academics, and distribute them to a massive area, something that had never been able to be cohered before. Something like the United Kingdom or something like the Netherlands or even like the United States of America. And while it brought together a massive area of people, the also kind of perhaps less obvious effect that what it was able to do is there's something kind of universalizing and homogenizing about its effect, because everybody reads the same 4 or 5
Yes.
newspapers, or
Yeah.
then in the age of the 20th century, everybody watches the same 4 or 5 TV channels. And so regardless of the truth content of what information is going into these media productions, the actual structure is that everybody within this massive organization receives the same truth, in inverted commas. And where we find ourselves with the internet, these information flows are just radically and rapidly decentralized. It's something like, I often think of it like a flood. Information coming in from all directions, and obviously we hear in the news about the problem with fake news, which is a problem, but disinformation has always been around. I think
Absolutely.
the more interesting problem to think of, it's not actually the truth content, but just the sheer volume of it and the sheer directions of it. The idea of a shared reality tunnel existing, anything akin to a nation where people, like I said, read the same newspapers, disappears when everyone can read a blog, everybody can listen to a podcast. And so while on the one hand, I agree, we're talking about trying to scale up to have perhaps planetary level consciousness and organizations, but at the same time, we're being pushed into smaller and smaller units. I kind of think of it as the Spotify effect. With Spotify, everybody has a really, really niche music playlist that totally suits their interests, and nobody else has heard of any of the fucking bands that they like in the world.
No. The world used to be simple, you know. You had Michael Jackson, Madonna, and then Prince.
The Beatles.
And that was it.
Right.
Well, and indeed, or the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and that was enough for everyone, and the rest was niche. But indeed, now it's the long tail. Of course, there's also room for more diversity, but it can also be very confusing. So yes, it might be that this superorganism or super intelligence or noosphere, whatever you want to call it, it may be a confusing mind. I think right now it's quite a emerging entity that we cannot really grasp. We can philosophize about, but certainly the thoughts it has, there's a lot of confusion there because it's emerging.
I tend to be quite actually pessimistic in the short term, unfortunately, because I feel like technology is pulling apart, like I said, our nation states and contemporary politics. If it's like
I must say, okay, I'm going on record and I'm saying it, but I'm not saddened that nation states may disappear. I'm with you with that. Yes, it will give a lot of friction if this is happening in the next century. After all, they only have been here for a few centuries, and right now they are they bring us a lot. We're citizens, and a well-organized nation state does a lot for its citizens. But at this global level, they are like stalling things. Think of the global pandemic. It's very difficult for nations to organize that among themselves. Think of climate change. That cannot be addressed at a national level. And the fact that there's so much tension between nations on who does what, well, that doesn't help us. So there I believe in the future more in regions, like organized cities where people can go from one end of the city to the other end and you have a feeling with it. And also, I think we need some kind of global government. And before I sound utterly totalitarian, not for everyone, not for everything, they should not decide too many things in your life. But these things like pandemic, climate change, how we cope with artificial intelligence, deforestation, they have to be addressed at a global level, and we need some governance at that level. Yeah, and for nations, it's just very difficult to do it.
One of the most interesting effects of the internet, the way that I see it, is how it dissolves certain government or leadership structures that happen to be top down and sort of all encompassing, like the nation state.
Yeah.
But it invented others that are much more networked. They are much more of the netocracy. They are much more, for example, I am not merely Daniel, one individual, finite in the humanist way, but rather, for YouTube, I am my watch history. And for my bank, I am my transaction history. And for my school, I was my grades. And so I am different individual flows, in the words of Deleuze. So I don't know if it's an either or question, but it definitely comes up. So on one side, we have these top-down ways of governing these supernatural structures, but it feels to me like the naturally emerging, naturally is such a weird word in this context, but the naturally emerging way of for power to emerge is through these flows, through these specific niche ways of organizing power between individuals. Yeah. Do you feel like that's if it emerges a lot, that some network effects might come into play, or is there a need for a top-down entity?
Well, some top-down decisions are needed, although to a large extent, maybe they can be networked. We have to organize some things at a planetary level, that I'm sure of, because if we don't, some things will be crushed or get lost. And climate change, I think, is the best example. But how to organize them, man, that is the question. And maybe you see ways to organize it in a networked way, because clearly that is very powerful, as you described. And you could also understand social media as a way to for us to become tribal again, but then in a modern way, in a technological way. Because social media allows us to define ourselves not as an autonomous individual in space, but as through our connections with others. And that's quite similar to what happened in ancient human societies. If you are part of a tribe, well, it's not about you. And everyone who's part of a tribe knows this, that it's not this flat notion of me as an individual. No, you are part of the bond of the tribe, and you define yourself in how you are connected within your tribe. And it's ancient, it's not technological, but it's very similar to what happens in social media. And to me, this also explains the success of social media companies, because they revive this deep intuition that people have, but then in a modern way. And yeah, it's, if you realize that social media only exists for, well, less than 20 years. I think 2007 was the big year in which things became big with smartphones, and social media became big. Of course, it existed, well, less than 20 years. And it's only such a short time. We're still figuring it out, especially because now we also have all these robot players or fake profiles intervening, and the governance. Is it correct that Jack Dorsey can decide Donald Trump should not be on Twitter anymore? Well, I think that's very, very problematic, that the CEO decides something that you rather have decided in a democratic process. But no, the democratic process is basically, set aside, because we're all in this social media, and that has the impact now. And then there are different powers. We are figuring it out on the go. It's a big experiment that we're in the middle of.
Phenomenal. Owen and I, in many of our circles, are also speaking a lot about tribalization and what happens in these tribe dynamics. You've been talking about this for at least 10 years, as far as I can recall. And one of the interesting things that comes up often is this notion of exodus, namely that if you look at the history of tribes as an entity have had different ways of moving in the world, of making decisions and all of that. And one idea that comes up is exodus. I'm right now making the connection with spaceship Earth, namely this idea that small groups, that the only sort of universal human unit is not the individual, the Cartesian individual, but rather the tribe, and that's kind of the real one. Everything else is kind of something that comes on top of it. And I don't know, that there's definitely something that comes up and often about specific groups of individuals coming together.
And what do you mean with the
communities.
exodus in this setting?
Exodus meaning groups of individuals that choose to sort of cut out some individual flows that come from the overall society and curate them, and therefore curate community, whether physically or mentally, maybe through a set of shared lenses. I don't know. Do you see that as emerging?
I would read that also as an evolutionary dynamics and strategy. It's quite similar, you know, if you are with a group of people on a certain, you are on a hill, and but yeah, you see there's another hill over there, and what if we pass that hill? What would be behind that hill? Maybe there's more food, maybe there's a better world, maybe there's a utopia. That kind of conversation is, of course, ancient. And then what you sometimes see is that the progressive, open-minded, optimistic people, they say, let's move there, let's see what's there behind that hill. Maybe there's a better world there, and they go. But there's also a group of more conservative people who say, no, we have to be happy with what we have here, because it might be that there is something terrible behind that other hill. I stay here. I don't move. You don't move. You better not move, because you will lose everything you have if you pass that hill. And they're both right. It's both a valid strategy. It's just that sometimes one wins and sometimes the other wins. And I think it's quite good that within a larger population, both of these energies exist. So that there are some people who are conservative, they want to maintain or even go back to a past. And there are also people who are more frivolous and more progressive, and they want to explore something something new. And yeah, you cannot tell which is the better strategy. In a way, if you have the overview, you should say you should do both. You should be progressive and conservative at the same time. But then, how do you do that? You know, if you make a decision, I go there or I stay here. Yeah, you cannot split up. Although as a tribe, and if you talk about exodus, then you can sometimes split up.
And like, as far as I can see it, it's this ability to ride this evolutionary dynamic and have experiments in different directions, to have some tribes that are able to go and to cross the hill, like you say, and some tribes that stay here. The issue then is how that meshes with global governance and global solutions to the problems if you're having a top-down dictate that says everybody does this. And as far as I can make sense of it, this isn't even like me saying this is the way it should be, but I think the 21st century is going to see some pretty strict top-down decision making. It's like we've already seen with the pandemic. We've had a pandemic which is by no measure the worst pandemic that ever has existed, but the response to it has definitely been the most severe response to a pandemic globally that we've ever seen. And
but do you think it has been the most severe response?
I think so, in terms of pretty much everywhere in the world locking down, exclude, say, a couple of places.
Oh, yes, yeah. You mean the policy?
Yeah.
Yes.
A lockdown.
Yeah, okay, I get you now.
And to kind of talk about technology.
The agency from the government and how they acted and what they did. Definitely, I agree with you. I think we have never seen that before. Simply also because governments weren't capable and the information was not there. I think that's maybe the most important thing. If you look now at the Spanish flu, estimates are like 40 million people died in the Spanish flu. That's still a lot more than the current pandemic. Although the total amount of people living on the planet was 1.5 billion in that time, so way less. So we now have 6 times the amount of inhabitants on the planet, but I've, I would be surprised if we also would go to 100 million deaths. We're not there because we have the information and we can see what's happening, we can measure, and we can also act upon it. But it still feels like this top-down approach. I cannot get out of my house anymore. It still feels frustrating. But yeah, I have to add: is the glass half full or half empty? For me, it's half full, because if we would not have this policy, then many more people would die.
They would, although I don't think the rates would be anything like the Spanish flu, because as far as we kind of know, it's not the young who are particularly vulnerable.
It's different. I agree.
So that's there, but kind of going back to the point, as you said, it's only now our technologies have allowed governments to even contemplate and coordinate something like a mass lockdown where everybody is kind of staying in, at least
Yes.
in theory. And what I find myself thinking is that if there are new problems thrown at us by what we might call the biosphere in the 21st century, whether more pandemics or whether flooding, whether temperature changes, the lockdown is now a known tool in the box. And humans in general, there has been some resistance, but the mass opinion seems to be that we agree that the lockdown is something that we will go along with. I'll be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of lockdowns, but that's that's another question. What I see is that we will probably have more iterations of lockdown style behavior. In the same way,
century,
I read what's happened with Twitter taking Donald Trump as being part of the same category of decision. It's some small unit taking a decision that shuts off a behavior. In this case, the behavior is reading the tweets of Donald Trump. Never before has that type of coordination been possible. No. So what's interesting then is where we have on the one hand mass top-down coordination, and on the bottom these emerging networks and subcultures that are increasingly more experimental and kind of bizarre and probably more diverse in terms of the possibilities of human experience that they permit than anything before. And I see it as being really the battle of power in the 21st century between, on the one hand, small experimental networks that want to go, we want to do this, and mass coordinated kind of cybernetic power that says, no, everybody needs to do this.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But I also think as an answer, well, the idea of democracy is that you connect them, that these smaller networks, that they have an influence, and in a way they already do have an influence. Although, if there are a million small networks, then it might feel as if you don't have an influence. But I think this is the difference between the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, as an individual, or maybe as a board of directors making this decision, or a democracy making a decision. So I rather have this setting where the smaller networks can have their say, and because we are connected. But how do we, add all the nudges from all the smaller entity into one big gesture? That's a huge challenge. But you cannot make everyone happy, that, because some big decisions, they sometimes, to protect the weak, a bigger group of stronger people is unhappy, and that's democracy.
I think it was either Vernadevsky or I think it was Chardin, Teilhard de Chardin, that said that at the time of the emergence or transition between the geosphere and the biosphere, that there was a lot of tumult, a lot of catastrophes. Also, when the geosphere was born, it was also a tumultuous period. We could also say that the period now of the birth and rise and maturation of the noosphere, at least as we're living it right now, is also full of tumult and conflict even. Some people speak about the idea of fourth generation warfare, meaning that this is war that also encompasses a lot of psychological dynamics, that takes the newly found ability that we've just gotten from technology to display and curate information and weaponizes it, obviously. Now, one of the things that I propose with my view of ontological design is that these what can be used in a weaponized fashion. What the fact that they can be weaponized suggests is that it can also be designed, but designed within a context that unavoidably is competitive. So whether we like it or not, I believe that there is indeed a competition between different reality tunnels, different groups of people, subcultures trying to reach strategic goals, influence, control of resources, etc. And I think that this is an answer that rhymes with with your position around next nature, right? Instead of denying nature and trying to go back to a 18th or 17th century landscape painting of a fantasy, it's really embracing and moving forward.
Yes.
Do you think that there's, in the future we'll be able to design perception and design attention and design really how people connect even words together in a way that is domesticated?
Mm-hmm. Well, to a certain extent, it's already happening. That our perceived reality is already designed to a large extent, because look around in the room you are in now. Try to find the most natural thing in the room. Almost everything you perceive is the outcome of some decision by some other intelligent being, and sometimes it's yourself, then you designed it yourself. But we made so many decisions that created a world that we now perceive. So yes, that's already ongoing, I would say. And maybe the question is also, I'm curious how you think about this. This notion of autonomy. If the things you design end up designing us, we're also perhaps being encapsulated in this superorganism that is emerging, that has its own agency, that can also help us. But what happens to the notion of autonomy and that maybe also romantic notion of you as an autonomous individual? Is that still appropriate? Is that also making the world better? I think that conversation we should have, because we tend to think of autonomy and freedom on the one hand, and then being imprisoned and encapsulated and domesticated on the other hand. But where do we meet in the middle? Is there a sweet spot in the middle as well?
Absolutely. The one very big question is who designs? Manuel de Landa speaks about the morphogenetic potential of materials, that the wood already contains the shoe in potency, and that there's only so many things you can actually construct with wood. You cannot bend it in certain ways. So the material already tells you what you can design with it. So in the same way, when we are designing our environments, our technologies, etc., especially when we're looking at the material that is human consciousness, human attention, that the question there becomes so complex and it turns back onto itself. So it's no longer a question of us humans having power over the landscape and the world. And it's also perhaps not only a question of the landscape completely overruling us, but it's a complicated one. I think that's why the exchange of both is where it's at. The exchange of the techniques and the methods of exchange between designer and designed, and the feedback loop. Carl Jung said that people don't have ideas, that ideas have people. That we are in a way governed by these entities that exist undomesticated in the Nuvoscope, that have their roots in our brains, but they are wild in many ways, wild systems, and we don't really have a handle on them. But I guess that perhaps it's really about managing the transaction and finding these currencies, symbolic, grammatological, even economic currencies, to engage with these systems. And what this always reminds me of is to finish off, alchemy as a craft. What the alchemists did was also try to exchange between the other world of the spirits, that they call them spirits because that's the best vocabulary they had, and themselves. Exchange sounds like a really powerful word.
Yeah, I think, well, that part where you describe Carl Jung and that people don't have ideas, ideas have people. It's funny, but it's also true. And that shows basically that we are the survival machines of memes, if you see what I mean. But then you can also read the classic book by Richard Dawkins, who says, like, we are the survival machine of genes. And in a way, both is valid. I think this also shows us that life exists at different levels. And the first thing that every living being also understands about its environment is that there's other life in the environment. And these are not only other animals or other human beings that you meet, but also other life at other levels. So yes, if I am the survival machine of a meme or of a thought that's out there in the noosphere, and at the same time I'm also the survival machine of the genes in my body that want to survive, and they create a whole human body to copy their genes. That story. Yeah, it can be saddening, but it can also be beautiful. And I would go for the latter, that you sense that you are connected at these different levels, and you are not completely autonomous. You also don't want to be autonomous, but still you are part of this stream of life at different levels, and life goes through you. So I think it's just as a way of being. I'm quite happy with it, and I can feel at home in the world, understanding this, and then also understanding the future.
Let me ask you something. Relates to a conversation that Daniel and I had the other day with someone.
Yes.
What is the purpose of design?
Ooh.
Because I
feel inclined to now quickly Google.
Well, so we were in a debate, and
yes, no, okay, yeah, let's get into that.
I kind of went for Daniel.
Yeah.
I can't even remember the points of his criticism there, but basically, in his view, design is about solving problems, and that Daniel's philosophy of ontological design wasn't sufficiently geared towards solving problems. Now, I think that solving problems is one component, but also just kind of artistry and creativity and generating beauty and an experience that might be called
I'm also in that,
if you will. It exists over and above the solving of the problem. And I'm curious to kind of get your input on this.
Well, I because I was about to go Google a definition, but of course now I had some time to think. Definitely, what to me also is important within design, it's the sensuous, that it relates to your senses and to experience. And I know that the design world is extending up to everything, because we used to have visual design and then maybe interaction design or social design and design thinking. But with design thinking, I'm already like, are we trying to put some discipline in design now? Because is it still about the senses? Is it still tangible? And if you talk about beauty, that's inherent to a kind of sensual experience, something that you experience. And I think design also relates to experience. In that sense, the definition, because I already gave my definition of technology, the materialization of ingenuity. And with design, it's also what we create. It's not always ingenuity. It can also just be beauty, or just be an expression, a sign, a D sign. That's the association I have with it as well.
Wow. The way that I associate it is that, a funny story. Apparently, and I don't know if this is disinformation or not, there was a guy who worked in the Kremlin. He was a chief of staff, and he invented something called the Nuvoscope.
All right.
What was the Nuvoscope? It was kind of a microscope, but to look at the news sphere, just like your glass. And so obviously this maybe was his information, and he had these really complex diagrams that nobody really understood. But the premise was, if we have a barometer to measure the climate and to figure out whether it's going to rain tomorrow, we can also do that to measure the Nuvoscope and therefore better navigate, better inform our decisions. What I answer to this, and this answers, that's kind of my point of view on the question that you, Owen, asked, is that whoever looks at the Nuvoscope will see a different thing. Therefore, it's also important to turn design back on itself and design the perceiver, and to design the preconditions, the niche out of which the perception can arise. Because if, design is many things, design thinking, service, UX, visual, and if it exists on a spectrum, then ontological design would be the part that connects that spectrum and makes it a circle, because it connects how you even see design. And in this sense, Dasein, Heideggerian, very, very embedded into how we are, and how that in itself is the center of the world in a way.
It's also a very holistic approach that you present, I think, with ontological design, because all the effects are part of it, and then how it, it's clearly beyond just an object, but also how you design the perception. I wonder how you relate to the theme of self-design, which is maybe simplifying it, flatten the ontological design approach. But simply the notion of that, yes, if we understand that the things we design end up designing us, can we also take a shortcut and start to design ourselves? And it immediately sounds post-human, and I don't want to go there immediately, but also in a way simpler thing, that this ancient saying of know thyself, know yourself, and that's a good thing in a moral sense, to know yourself. But design yourself, is that something similar?
I think so. One of the difficulties that I've had with ontological design is making it simple, or making it tangible here and there in ways that can be deployed, as the name suggests, as designs that we do. So indeed, I mean, it's such a big idea that what self-design sounds to me, and I don't know too much about it, would be a way to apply ontological design, or to basically design your environment to increase your whatever you want. You want to stop smoking, you want to lose weight, so you lock the fridge between a certain period, or you turn off the escalators in a mall so that people don't take the stairs to McDonald's. I don't know.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that can be done by that. Now, one of the things that comes up is the role of the designer, because we know from books like Nudge, and there was this other book published previously that was about I think it was about the nudge. So the nudge and the hook, these are all concepts that presuppose sort of a benevolent designer, like a benevolent dictator, paternalistic, that knows what's best for you, and they can tell you, you need this and that. And that opens up dark themes, and it can be dangerous. But I guess that what the danger points towards is the fact that it's effective. Because if it's dangerous, it can also be beautiful. This gives no solution. It gives no teleology, which is where I'm at within my research, right? I don't know what to say about teleology. It's like car makers don't tell people where to drive their cars. Mm-hmm. Why should design philosophers tell people what to design? It's a complicated one. I don't know.
Let me throw something up. Maybe we can use self-design to rewrite the history of the philosophy of ethics, and say ethics isn't always already self-design. To try and be virtuous is to attempt to channel your desires and your behaviors in a certain specific way. And different ethical codes form different ways of trying to be a being in relation to others. And once we get that, then ontological design actually becomes kind of the question of how do you practice ethics in an increasingly fluid informational and technological environment.
I completely agree.
Sounds very libertarian. complicated one. Where does the spaceship Earth go, Koert?
I've been diving in this notion of spaceship Earth of recently. It also connects to the fact that that we have the honor to reopen this beautiful flying saucer building in the Netherlands for audience. And I decided the spaceship Earth narrative and the idea that there are no passengers on spaceship Earth, only we're all crew, is a beautiful narrative. Still, it's over a century old, that we see the entire Earth as a spaceship. It's also, I would say, next nature avant la lettre, because if Earth is a spaceship, then means that it's not necessarily only this God paradise natural given that's there, but it's also it's a structure, it's a ship that needs maintenance, that has lots of resources, and it can go in certain direction, but we also need to work on it to find the right direction. Where will it go? Well, we have some billion years left before the sun runs out of energy, that I know. But yeah, if you think about it, it's our cradle of humanity. And I think we first have to show that we can maintain and take care of spaceship Earth in a good way before we go to spaceship Mars. I'm typically the progressive guy, but here I'm slightly conservative, maybe, that I say, are we ready to inhabit another planet? Is humanity ready for this kind of thing? Well, maybe not yet. We should definitely dream about it and work on it. I also will think it will take more time to actually have a meaningful presence on another planet. That will take a lot of time. It will not happen in the certainly not in the next decade. So it will take more time. And we also have to show we're ready for it, because we can talk about terraforming Venus, but currently we're more Venus forming Earth. And so to show that we are, as humanity, a good crew for spaceship Earth, it's just an important story to work on, and an assignment, I would say, for humanity as a whole. That also is quite concrete. Everyone can ask, you can ask yourself the question. Doesn't matter if you are 11 years old or you are 50 working in some middle management in a company. You can ask yourself the question, what do I do as a crew member for spaceship Earth? What's my role, and how can I improve it? So I also want to challenge people to ask that question. Do you have a feel for this? Like, if I would ask you now, like the both of you, like as a crew member of spaceship Earth, what do you like to add? How can you help the spaceship forward?
That's such a nice question. We know from some people's studies of how nomadic tribes were that we know that there was a dual structure of power, the king and the priest, and then there was also the matriarch, more or less. There are different versions of this, but one consensual one is this. And they had different roles. The king decides the supernatural. He rules the Nuvoscope of the tribe. He tells the tribe what the stars represent, what the gods want. So he has this magician king aura, and then the priest kind of maintains the coherence within the tribe. He solves disputes about business, about money, about what the truth is at a mundane level.
I think it's the other way around, right? That the king solves disputes and the priest the spiritual part.
Something like
I'm
that.
with Koert.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I've misread the list, but never mind. Whatever. There's these two functions of power, and one of the things that you said in the beginning, right, Koert, that the best shot that we have at saving the biosphere is in the Mindsphere, and Carl Jung also said, like in a famous interview, that the greatest problem that we have now is man, because we know far too little of man, and that's our greatest danger. Yes. Not the bombs, I mean, also the bombs, but through man first.
Yes.
And so before we, like, the greatest problem to solve, to put people on Mars and make sure that it works, is the problem of belief and how to cohere people around sort of belief structures and coherence. And this goes back to where we were before, that the nation state, for example, was sort of one answer to that problem that today is being kind of dissolved by the acid of the internet. And we have two options: balkanization or some sort of evolution in the noosphere. Because right now it does feel like the noosphere is balkanizing, but we can totally solve the problem of belief. And if the person who solves it best, it will show, and we will need that to cohere, to survive, to move past the civilizational barrier of dying on Earth, or maybe even moving past the Earth.
So
That'd
the
be my
question
answer.
was, as a crew member of Spaceship Earth, how do you take your role? How do you contribute?
So trying to solve the problem of cohering the crew, being, making sure
I think
everybody
you're very
can.
much indeed in that level of how the crew understands itself, and also the
Yeah.
spaceship and how we perceive it.
Yes,
Yeah.
because if the crew is fighting amongst itself and hating each other, and that nothing gets done.
Yeah. How about you, Owen? I'm just curious if you have maybe a similar answer to.
Well, I like to read books, and I like to do podcasts about philosophy and technology, and I like to do men's work. Like, I run a men's circle here in London with like 6 or 7 guys, and we come every week and we just talk about the difficulties and the contradictions and our aspirations in life. And I'm also part of this online network subculture, even called Manifesto, of guys doing much the same and trying to bring men's circles, spaces for guys to just explore their existence, make it more of a common thing. And so in terms of this, talking about like priests, I see myself as kind of setting myself into something priestly. Like, on the one hand, working with the theology of the time, which is the philosophy and the ideas about technology, but then also working with the people who go out and build stuff and who like who run day-to-day stuff and just help explore and answer the questions and the problems of being in a very kind of tangible way. I feel like, or rather I think, one of the flaws we've had in the modern era is that we threw away religion and we threw away the priest and replaced the priest with the academic, who does a very good job at coming up with ideas, and almost nothing about actually teaching people to relate to the fundamental problems of life, like suffering and where do we go when we die. And whether or not we have the answer to those questions, it's actually incredibly important having spaces and relationships where these questions are explored for our own, to put it bluntly, existential well-being. And I think it's an incredibly important space to actually bring some of this back and not allow it to be totally colonized by new age yogis in California.
Yes. Yeah, it's good that you add that final remark. Yeah, I agree, there's a need there. So yeah, we have achieved so much with our science and technology, but also some things that did not fit in that database have been completely ignored, and we need to find a way to give that its place again without going back to the dark ages, and because there are some risks as well. If you only look at the tension around being vaccinated right now, and or the new mobile networks, and the people are worried about radiation because they cannot grasp the science anymore, and there are and they also too many people feel this hole in the making of meaning or spiritual being. That's it's quite an important thing to also bring modernity, align that with some deep human needs that we still have.
For sure. And we're coming to the end now, I think, but just in terms of like what we were talking earlier with McLuhan's ideas and this rapid expansion of information flows. The fact that we're in such a chaotic and wild, incredibly dense information environment means that there are a million people trying to answer these questions. It's not even like before where there was a church and you could go and hear the priest reading out of the book. No, it's like the problem is far more complicated than that. And what we see, you know, we had that Q shaman guy storming the Capitol a couple of weeks ago. I think this is kind of we see in the surface level a manifestation of something that's very going on beneath the surface, which is like non-rational, non-scientific attempts at making sense of the world, and they're going to be everywhere. I think they're multiplying, and there's a big question of how do we responsibly kind of rein them in, at least for some people. There's a deep return of the mythopoetic, I think, and
yeah, and indeed there are so many, as you say. Well, yeah, the information you're looking for, you can find it. So it's not anymore like if you have a certain belief, what you believe, you can find some kind of argument that supports it, and it might be flawed, but that's very confusing in this time, especially because we're still in a different model. But in the end, it's diversity, it's many different voices. There's good stuff there as well. I'm just really curious if we can basically balance all the achievements of modernity and enlightenment and science, because we're all the better for it. We live longer, we're healthier, we have no more hunger, less violence, all these achievements. Can we balance that within the new information landscape? That's the challenge of today.
Fantastic. I think that we've gotten to about the end. I don't know if you have any extra remarks or any final comments, Koert.
Yeah, I just want to make a call for everyone to think of yourself on Spaceship Earth, and what are you going to do as a crew member? The question is easy. The answer is very difficult. But I think it is important that we have this planetary awareness and that we develop it, because it is this beautiful planet that we are all born on, and I hope we can find a path into the future where humanity can thrive, but also the other species and the planet at large.
Absolutely, evolution goes on. That's the main takeaway, and that's really an inspiring message, because even in these times, just the fact that we can conceive of a potential timeline into the future where it's not chaos, that's very valuable, and it's a very hard sort of line to tap into. So thank you, Koert.
Yes,
Owen,
thank you, Daniel and Owen.
Yeah, thank you.
No, I'm good. I'm just going to be thinking about this self-design as ethics.
Excellent.
This idea is really stuck with me. Thank you, Koert. It's been fantastic meeting.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay.
All right, we can stop the recording.